Right, okay, we'll get going. I'm going to try and close the session just a few minutes early as well, just so that people have time to kind of compose themselves ahead of observing the remembrance silence. So we'll try and get through and still have some time for some open questions at the end. So welcome everybody, and a big thank you to Lisa Stead, who's organised this session and is looking after groups and organisations that have been involved with funding that came via the County Council as part of the Contain Outbreak Management Fund. We're really pleased that we had the opportunity to get funding to organisations, but on top of that, do these free, open, accessible sessions to help build knowledge, skills and expertise as well. And it's been great that we've been able to open that offer up to everybody. So thanks for all your work that you're doing on that, Lisa. Today we're going to be focusing on volunteering. So we know that lots of organisations are entirely run by volunteers and others only have a very small employed workforce. So we know that volunteers are at the heart of most of what we do in our communities. So we're going to be looking at volunteering from a number of different angles through our speakers today. We're going to start off with Tariq, who joins us from Oxfordshire Community and Voluntary Action, who's going to give you an overview and introduction to the website Oxfordshire Volunteers, which is a really straightforward platform for advertising and recruiting for volunteer opportunities and for volunteers to be able to search for opportunities themselves. After that, we're going to be joined by Miriam from Oxford Hub, who's going to talk to us about the fantastic work that Oxford Hub were involved in through Oxford Together, really galvanising that volunteer effort around COVID response. But then she's going to tell us a little bit about how they've learned from that experience and what they're embedding for the future in terms of that community activation. And then we're going to move on to hearing from Mary at Volunteer Link Up about their experience with Oxfordshire's Good Neighbour schemes and some of the real challenges that organisations face in terms of volunteers, not just through the pandemic, but you know, sort of all the time really it's a challenge, and then the different levels that we've experienced. So Mary's going to be talking about some of the challenges around that, but also some of the ideas and opportunities for how we can address those needs. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Tariq, who's going to talk to us about Oxfordshire Volunteers.
All right, thank you very much, Laura. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen. Some of you may be aware we've had some bit of technical problems from my point of view. I can't see it on the second screen, so I was hoping to see as a participant, but hopefully see what you can see, but I can't. I've only got one screen. So can everyone see the slide?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Laura, if you could just start with along in terms of slides, if you can see them or not, or if I'm on the correct. Thank you, that would be really useful. So yeah, as Laura said, my name is Tariq Kundoka and the volunteer coordinator for Oxford Community and Voluntary Action. And my role is primarily around volunteering, brokerage, helping organisations to develop their capacity to take on, retain and maintain volunteers, and the other side is about helping volunteers to find their ideal opportunity and supporting them in the process in doing that. So before I go on a little bit more about me and my role, how many of you do volunteer? Could I just ask, have anyone currently volunteer or volunteered in the past? Yeah, oh, there's quite a lot of volunteers. Okay, that's almost everyone there, I think. And how many are you responsible for managing volunteers? Do you currently manage volunteers or work with? So quite well, nearly everyone again. So also we practice what we preach. Brilliant, that's good. Yeah, I have volunteered in the past. I'm not doing currently, but I'm looking to do other things. And I've volunteered with a number of organisations myself in the past. So I'm going to share the screen again. So in terms of, oh sorry, on current slide. So in terms of my role, can I see application? Right. So a brokerage service. So as I mentioned, it's matchmaking, capacity building, both for the organization and the individual, helping recruit, retain, and develop volunteers. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more, and I'll have some slides around that. We help to publicize opportunities, and we do that various ways. We've got pretty good links with the Oxford Times. We've got a social media campaign. But the primary one is Oxford Volunteers, which I'm going to talk about in more detail. We also deliver training around volunteering. So in the past, I've done volunteering under law, but I had to recruit volunteers, how to manage volunteers. This week and last week, I did very late evening courses to the FA, specifically for grassroots football clubs. I coordinate forums. At the start of the pandemic, I had 2 forums, which was the Volunteer Coordinators Forum and the Mutual Aid Forum. And as people have gone back to work, there's been less of a need for the Mutual Aid Forum, so I've merged them now into the community, into the Coordinators Forum. But I'm thinking of having a Trustees Forum every once in a quarter, possibly, but I know other things are happening, so I want to coordinate with that. I provide one-to-one support to organizations. So I've got a couple of case studies which I will talk about, and I'll give you some more details about the kind of support for the organization and for the individuals as well. Okay, and one of the things that we also do with organizations is to help them to develop policies and procedures and good practice. So, you know, volunteer agreements, voluntary strategies, things that we've done before, risk assessments, etc. Sometimes I sort of do some things around charity commission and good governance, but that's essentially, it's handled by my colleague John Hayes. But where it touches on volunteers, I do some stuff around that as well. Okay, I've tried to pilot with, and I'd be interested if anyone organisations interested in doing like piloting a recruiting and marketing strategy in terms of volunteers. I have done some with British Art Foundation and a few others in the past, but I'd be interested in developing a couple of pilots that then we can use as templates and then share with other organisations. So if everyone's interested in that, I'd be interested in talking to you. Right, you see the Zoom page. So this is Oxford Volunteers. Over 4,000 volunteers. I think it's nearly 5 now. Last count of volunteers. So that's throughout the county, and something like 600 to 700 organisations. There's some duplication because some organisations have registered twice for various reasons. And obviously, it's a bit like Facebook. The more people that are on it, the more useful it becomes, and it has a snowballing effect. I'm not sure whether you can see this or not. So, all right, okay. God, it's kicked me out. I had all this lined up. Sorry. Right, so this is like, can you see the OCVA page? No, yeah. So this is like, would be your, if you were to create an account with us, this is where you'd create your account. Apologies for that. And you'd create your account, and this would be your page, home page. Very quickly, if I can show you this one. So it's loading, it's doing something. Right, so can everyone see the Wolvercott Scouts? So this would be like their front page when volunteers would see, and they've included a video there as well, which I was going to play, but time won't allow. So you can put all your content about your organization, and then it would then list all their opportunities. Here, they've currently just got one, but you know, it would list all the opportunities for that organisation. And people could see that in various ways in terms of searching for that particular organisations, or just searching for volunteering, or searching through via themes. Can everyone see the one for Oxford Pride? So you can see that one's a quite really nice one, really colourful. So you don't even really need your own website. You can do it through here, all your content, and you can manage it through here. And they've got a lot of opportunities here, and all their opportunities come here below. At the moment, they're all relating to trustees, because I'm working very closely with them to recruit trustees, but it could be any role that you wanted. And the volunteer would click register, and you would get an automatic notification that someone's interested. This site isn't primarily for, it isn't just for recruiting volunteers. You can actually manage volunteers, so certificates, you can log hours, etc. It's a fully fledged volunteer management system. And we've got partners in that. We've got Cherwell and Mary from West Oxford, South Oxford as well, and Oxford Brooks. So it goes through there. It goes through to Oxford Brooks is 18,000 students, 18,000 plus students. So yeah, so those are a few examples of you know, opportunities and organisations putting those roles up there. So one of the things we did was we responded to change when COVID happened. We weren't part of the vaccination program, but we helped fill the gaps. So individual volunteers, individual organisations and providers would contact us, particularly GPs, local NHS providers. We also work with schools when they were reopening, because they need volunteers to help them to do testings for students. That's so one of the examples. And recently we've done it with Afghan refugees. So that was a particular circumstances where very particular language skills, Farsi and Dari, were required. So the example I'm trying to do is that we don't just put it on Oxford Volunteers. We work with the circumstances, and we will tailor make that. So for COVID, we had to look at very specific skill sets and identifying volunteers. So I did one-to-one sessions with groups and individuals. I tried to identify, for example, nurses, retired doctors, people who'd done the vaccination training that the Good Sam through by the Good Sam Act. And then in terms of, if I can go to the next slide, yeah, I've got 2 minutes. So very briefly, there's another organisation that was struggling with volunteers. Each one of those is a different role, and I think in the end we got about something like 64 referrals to them. About half of them actually went on to become volunteers. Not all of them, because they had to do DBS checks. There's a lengthy process for this organisation because of the nature of their clients. Got 1 minute, I think. And this is an example of the one-to-one sessions I would hold with individuals. The one-to-one sessions I hold with individuals, there's essentially 3 categories. One is vulnerable people who just need that extra support, and one-to-one session trying to find volunteers. The other is the opposite end, which is very highly capable people, and they'll go on there and they'll say, oh, I want to work on a garden project or something. And I will say, yeah, okay, I can get you that, but you've been a director and you've got engineering skills. Would you consider this? So for example, previously I was able to support an engineer, very capable person, get them on a few trustee positions as well, and work with a charity that we're looking to do a learning disability, a sensory garden for children with learning disability, because he had an engineering and electronic background and networks. He was able to help them to develop that. So essentially, yeah, 3 categories there. One is vulnerable people, one who are capable, The other third category is people who want to volunteer with a specific outcome. So this could be improving their mental health or physical health, or it could be looking at career options. So if they, it could be, I've worked with single mums, for example, who've been out of work for a long time, so they want to use volunteering as a route to employment, students, for example, as well, or people who are just looking for career change whilst they're working, build up some volunteer experience in another sector so that they're in a position to apply. So it's one-to-ones as well with those organizations. I think I've run out of time, so I'm gonna just ask if there's any questions.
Thank you, Tariq. Rosemary had a question about DBS checks and whether that's still the responsibility of the organization. Do you want to just try and quickly answer that before we move on?
Yes, essentially, you don't have to do the DBS yourself. You can subcontract it, and there are some very good ones that do it at more or less cost or very limited cost. But ultimately, for safeguarding for your organization, you are responsible. Specifically, your trustees or management committee are legally responsible, both legally and morally.
So Oxfordshire Volunteers, as the brokerage site, doesn't do that, Rosemary. But we can support you to link you up with an organisation who can do those. Yeah,
because it would be near impossible for us, because we don't know the nature of your role, the issues, etc. So yeah.
Right. I will pick up any questions that we haven't had time to answer and make sure that we get answers back to people. But I'm going to rapidly say thank you so much, Tariq, and we'll move on to Miriam now.
Awesome. How long do I have, Laura?
About 10 minutes, if that's okay, Miriam. Thanks.
Fantastic. So hi everybody, lovely to see you all. Some of you again, most of you I think for the first time, and thank you Laura for having me. I'm here today with Stacey, my colleague, who's going to also be presenting with me on Oxford Together, and there's loads that we could say, but we will try to kind of keep to points and rattle through it quickly, and save some time for questions as well. And I'm happy to also answer questions over email afterwards if we do run out of time. So I'm going to share my screen and then off we'll go. All right, everybody got my screen? Perfect. So Stacey and I are both here from Oxford Hub today, and Oxford Hub is a community organisation which basically works to bring lots of different communities together around Oxford, and over the past year and a half, I suppose, we have been very, very busy running Oxford Together, a coronavirus response programme with the support of OCF, City Council, and lots of other partners who we couldn't have done this without. And so Oxford Together mobilised very rapidly in March 2020, and we set up a few different volunteering opportunities. The main ones were practical tasks, so supporting people who were shielding to get their shopping by matching them one-to-one with a volunteer, alongside lots of other things like prescriptions, dog walking, you name it. And the other side was companionship phone calls through our programme Phone Links. And within the first 2 weeks, we had 331 volunteers registering with us, and that's people who completed the full application process. That's not our initial sign-ups, that was several thousand. Yeah, now tasks-wise, we've done over 9,000 practical tasks and over 9,000 companionship phone calls, and that's the ones which the volunteers have come back to us and logged on the system, so the numbers are probably even higher than that. We have a very kind of particular view, I suppose, of the pandemic because of this work that we're doing, and so we might have seen a slightly different side to it than other people in the room who have been working in slightly different areas. So this is very much kind of our experience of managing volunteers in this time. And I'm going to talk through a little bit about managing volunteers kind of during crisis response, and then Stacey is going to talk about where we're going now, now that we you know, we're not out of the pandemic, but we are moving from crisis response into something more long-term, the new normal, as it were. I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing that phrase. Our key learnings in mobilising really fast with huge numbers of volunteers and huge numbers of referrals coming in as well. We had, as I say, 331 volunteers within the first few weeks. We had 250 tasks coming in as well. So it really exploded out of nowhere. I think the big one is we were fortunate and we were able to mobilise fast. And we were also fortunate in that at that point, everybody, you know, was experiencing a crisis. And so those who were able to do their bit were really, really keen to. And so we were able to make the most of those volunteers who wanted to come forward. We had like rolling training dates in the diary. We put as much of the training as we could online so people could access it in their own time. And we had rolling peer support sessions in the diary for volunteers who were ongoing as well. And so everything was sort of regimented, calendared, so people could join at the point when they did. And I think that really helped us. As I said, we had sort of two roles, practical support and phone links. And so that was quite a clear offer for volunteers to quickly say, okay, we've got this enormous life-changing event going on, what can I do? One of these two things. Another one I would say is delegating. So this comes very naturally, I think, to community organisations which are all volunteers, but once organisations get a bit bigger or do have staff, I think sometimes we forget that actually volunteers don't have to just be out and about doing tasks on the ground. We can also have them behind the scenes. And that was something that I think was a real success with Oxford Together. So as an example of that, we had volunteers supporting other volunteers in our phone links programme. So you could be a volunteer calling somebody or calling a few people for companionship, but there was also a volunteer role above that where you managed 8 to 12 people who were doing the calling role. And so we recruited these quite carefully, often through networks that we already had and carefully vetted. But that then meant that we were able to run at its height, probably about 250 matches with very little capacity from staff, because we had about 10 or more pod leaders who were managing the volunteers. So if a volunteer had a question about a call that they thought maybe could have gone better, or they were a little bit concerned, but not to the degree of needing to raise the safeguarding flag, they could go to their pod leader. If it became safeguarding or if they were feeling really out of their depth, then that would come to staff. And so we have this sort of like grandparent relationship, which enabled us to work at great scale. Within that as well, I would say encouraging community is really important. And I think what we've seen best is when volunteers got to know each other, as well as getting to know the people who they're supporting, and then invited each other in, encouraged each other, and provided that. And the last one I will say is boundaries. So I think especially this past year and a half, people have really, really wanted to do their bit, but that has led to sometimes volunteers going above and beyond and finding themselves over-promising to the person that they're supporting. They might start off doing shopping and then end up, you know, like doing the post, taking the dog out, doing the shopping 3 times a week instead of once. And we saw that happen a few times and we thought we need to kind of boundary this a bit more. And so, yeah, boundaries, ways to say no, when to say no. We included that all in our initial training as we learning as we go. And I think, yeah, giving people the specific sentence that they could say proved quite helpful in some cases. And one other example I'll give from the crisis response is our prescription runners team. So we got together a group of people who were keen on sports and they would deliver prescriptions for people by running or cycling around the city to deliver that prescription. And we set them all up in a WhatsApp group. And what we found was that this group quite organically evolved into a really nice community space where somebody would do their run, then they'd post about it or they'd take a photo from it, and then other people would start to you know, respond in that way. And so we've really encouraged WhatsApp groups since then because it's a great way to build volunteer community. And we're now starting to model that with other tasks that we're doing. So, for example, last Christmas, we had prescription runners in a WhatsApp group. Instead of doing prescriptions, going out and giving some packs to people who we were supporting. So that sort of single task can be done in that sort of community way, and it's quite accessible. So yeah, I'll pass to Stacey now and talk a little bit about the changes and what's coming next.
Hi everyone. So the volunteer landscape has changed a little since Oxford Together formed in March 2020. Right at the beginning, our volunteers were really keen to help in their community. They wanted to join force with their neighbours in fighting the fight against COVID. They did amazingly at this. They helped each other by going shopping, topping up electric meters, dog walking, hanging curtains, gardening, even building shower cubicles to house orchids. This hasn't changed. However, we're finding many volunteers are now busy again, going back to work, wanting to spend more time with their family. There's also been some general feelings that some volunteers are concerned for their family's health when mixing with others and maybe stepping back before demand potentially increased over the winter period. Meanwhile, the need for this support is still there, but it's changed slightly. During the pandemic, individuals generally needed support because they were self-isolating or too afraid to go out. More recently, the demand has manifested itself into a need to tackle isolation, which has always been there, anxiety, and finding alternative solutions for those with decreased mobility and who have little or no support network in getting out. Next slide, please, Miriam. So the main challenges we've faced over the last few months across all of our Oxford Together programmes has been managing volunteer and participant expectations. This has arisen mainly when volunteers have been supporting someone for a while, and when they step back, the expectation is that we can replace this with the same support they've been giving or receiving. This can get more challenging when a volunteer has gone above and beyond what they were initially asked to do, just as Miriam said before. Which leads us into having difficult conversations with both parties in trying to ascertain exactly how the current relationship has gone and seeing how we can realistically support this going forward. We do check in with our volunteers' feedback and to check in generally. However, this isn't feasible all the time with everyone, and there is a fine line we've found between checking in and checking up on them. This is work in progress, but leads us on to how we're responding to these challenges to ensure the experience is as beneficial and as enjoyable as possible for the volunteers. Next slide, please, Miriam. Thanks. Go back one, please. So our response has been to focus not only on demand, but on how new programmes can best suit volunteers. We've now transitioned from Oxford Together, which is now called Together Neighbours, which includes both new and adaptive programmes. So with Bridge Builders, we're aiming to support people to have a go at things they want to try, matching participants with a buddy who can help them develop their confidence or a hobby, or they can go together to activities in the hope the individual will gradually rebuild their sense of agency and can do what they want independently. Volunteers are, for example, trained in techniques that build the agency of the person they're supporting with such as motivational interviewing techniques. Our plans with peer-to-peer is to support people to decrease their reliance on a volunteer and to introduce them to those they may get on with a shared purpose. This is a transition from our phone links programme, whereby the emphasis is less on a caller phone and the callee, but for two people to share companionship and skills on a mutual basis. With focusing on how our programmes also suit volunteers, it's become apparent that the general feeling now is that with practical taskers, volunteers are most happy to take on short-term tasks rather than committing to supporting someone long-term, for example, with shopping. This, along with our principle of encouraging agency, has led us to focus on an asset-based approach where we draw on people's skills, strengths and potential and steer away from the volunteer beneficiary dynamic. We recognise that there are many instances where people do need things doing for them, but where possible, we'd like to support a doing with rather than doing for approach. Next slide, please, Miriam. This leads us quickly onto our WhatsApp groups. We've been using WhatsApp groups to coordinate and communicate with volunteers since Oxford Together began. They've been really successful and we're now trying using them in a more specific way. Some of the key intentions behind this are to work with volunteers to create as flexible and as targeted experience as possible for them, to share power with the volunteers and to help grow community spirit in encouraging them to organise with themselves. For example, we first trialled this with one of our participants who had 3 volunteers supported to leave her flat each day. By being a helping hand in getting her and her walking aid down the stairs, this meant she could get out and about during the day. It was becoming challenging for us to reorganise volunteers on swapping days, etc. So I'm now in a group with them and they organise support between themselves for whatever days, times suit them. We're also trialling this with the dog walking group and gardening with the East Oxford Good Neighbour scheme. Over time, we aim to introduce other interest-specific groups such as DIY and with a volunteer leading on each. So why does this work? Then they join a community of volunteers who can chat and share with each other, which builds rapport between the volunteers rather than only communicating with Oxford Hub staff. They can choose to respond when and where they want to. There's no pressure, no need to respond if they're not interested in a task. But it is easier for volunteers to register their interests when the requests are coming straight into their pocket or their bag. It also becomes a fun competition between those who want to get involved. That's it from me. Back to you, Miriam.
I'm on mute. Just to sum up super quickly our kind of overall thinking around this area. The volunteer landscape has changed. People are, more tired. People have really kind of done loads in the past year and a half, and now a lot of them do need a bit of a break. But the need has changed as well. Much fewer people need the kind of shopping support that we were doing, and those who do, sort of more people who will probably need that support long term. We're not seeing so many people sort of going in and out of isolation, and people have sort of often found their own sort of ways to manage as well over the past year. And that's what we really want to encourage, supporting people to find their own ways to manage. And we've supported lots of people over the past year and a half who, maybe were never supported by a volunteer before. And that has also created an opportunity for us to engage them as active participants in their community. And that's where this sort of idea of doing with instead of doing for comes in. How can we mobilise the people who we've supported to also support others, whether that's getting involved in a WhatsApp group, whether that's helping out with a single task, or whether that's becoming a bigger kind of community change maker as well. And I think these sort of small ways to participate, like by being a member of a group where a task comes up, that you're not committing to like a really long-term thing each time, benefits both sides of that coin, the people who are a little bit tired out from the past year and the people who have received support and now may be ready to give it as well. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting time. I think it's certainly not without its challenges, but yeah, we're going forward excited to see what comes next. And that's us. Thanks very much.
That's fantastic, and I love the way that you've captured the idea of a shift from doing for to doing with, and I think that that's something that we're sort of all wanting to strive for in terms of our community activity. So thank you for rattling through that and keeping so well to time. I'm going to hand straight over to Mary, and then if we have a few minutes at the end, people can ask generic questions to any of our speakers, but any questions that people put in the chat, if we don't have time to address them, Lisa and I will go through them and get back to people. So if we don't have time for that Q&A bit, please do pop your question in there, and we'll go back to it and pick it up and follow that up with you. So thank you so much, Miriam and Stacey. I'm going to hand on to Mary now to talk to us about Oxfordshire's Good Neighbour schemes.
I'm under some pressure to be quick, so I will be. Bear with me 1 second and I will share my screen. Okay. So this is one of the things I hate about Zoom, is that you can't see. Right. So Volunteer Link Up supports the currently around 70 to 80 Good Neighbour schemes in Oxfordshire. We're in partnership with Age UK. Good Neighbour schemes are local voluntary groups that offer a service in their community for older, vulnerable or isolated people in need of help and support. And many Good Neighbour schemes have been around for a very long time. So Volunteer Link Up, for example, is a Good Neighbour scheme based in Witney. We've been around for about 38 years and we offer volunteer transport, befriending and support with practical tasks. 1 sec. So we had a slightly different experience to Oxford Hub, I think, and it's important that I say that I'm not speaking on behalf of all Good Neighbour schemes. Obviously, there was a huge variety of experiences, but we have got a kind of good measure of how Good Neighbour schemes found the pandemic period, and we did have a lot of challenges. So we've got often small communities, small committees. So some of our Good Neighbour schemes are based in a village and there's one or two key people managing the other volunteers, or they are the volunteers and the committee themselves. Volunteer Link Up has 4 members of staff, but we've got a FTE equivalent of 2, so that's 2 full-time members of staff. One of the key challenges for the Good Neighbour schemes is that there are lots of older volunteers running Good Neighbour schemes, and during that period, kind of from spring 2020, many of them had to step back because they were over 70, so they were shielding or they were getting out very little and therefore weren't able to meet the need. A lot of the schemes offer community transport where volunteers use their own cars to transport people to medical appointments, as well as visit people in care homes or get out and about. And that was not possible for a very long period of time. And we didn't go back to any transport at all until the summer of 2020. And then that was only what was considered essential appointments, so doctor's appointments or hospital appointments. Lots of our Good Neighbour schemes did offer phone befriending, but for some reason it wasn't in demand. I know Oxford Hub had a good experience with this, and Age UK did as well. And some of our schemes did as well, but a lot of people wanted some kind of face-to-face contact, and perhaps because they were older, didn't feel comfortable with phone befriending. And the other issue we had is that it was quite difficult to find things to talk about if people weren't getting out and about. Navigating restrictions and guidelines was really tricky. So Rosemary has talked in the chat about the fact that they haven't got trustees or paid staff. Lots of our Good Neighbour schemes are like that. So managing things like how to sort out PPE for clients and volunteer drivers in a car getting to a hospital appointment was challenging and induced anxiety for a lot of our volunteers. Our offices were closed, so Volunteer Link Up is based in the Methodist Church in Witney. That was closed, and we weren't particularly well set up for home working, as a lot of the other Good Neighbour schemes weren't. IT was a bit tricky, to put it mildly. As you were seeing from Oxford Hub and from other mutual aid groups, lots of them were able to react really, really quickly to the pandemic and the need. They had a younger demographic with some of the reasons, but also perhaps set up in a way that made it a bit easier. Some of our Good Neighbour schemes did connect with those mutual aid groups, but others struggled to do so. And there was also quite a fear around some of the social media stuff. So Miriam's talked a lot about WhatsApp. A lot of our volunteers found that quite difficult to navigate, to get up and running with that. And the key thing, I think, that, you know, again, speaks again from what Miriam said, is that mutual aid groups, some of them have continued, but others, you know, people have gone back to work or off furlough and they haven't continued. And now Good Neighbour schemes have got to kind of step up and meet that need again, but it's been hard for them. They've found it difficult to raise their profile again after being inactive for quite a long period. So the demand is low, but they often know that the need isn't, and that people in their community do need support, but it's about finding them. And the key thing that we also saw was that an inability to contribute during that key time made that Good Neighbour schemes did feel a bit unneeded and a bit unmotivated. So with much more positivity, what did we and other Good Neighbour schemes do about it? So one of the things that made a big difference for Volunteer Link Up and for a lot of the Good Neighbour schemes is that they kept in contact with volunteers. Volunteer Link Up has still got volunteers who want to remain on our books, but don't feel able to actively contribute at the moment. We keep in touch with them. We tell them they still have a value. We don't apply pressure or ask them to do anything, but we say, you know, we still value what you are to us, and that when you are able to offer support, then we'll support you to do so. The other thing that has made a big difference to Good Neighbour schemes is that we just talked openly about the challenges. We listened to what other people were experiencing. We listened to what people schemes that are having success, who were connecting to mutual aid groups or were able to react. We offered creative and different opportunities for volunteers. So I'm not going to read all of these out, but one of my favourites is that people knocked on the door of residents whose birthday it was and sang happy birthday in the street. And apparently that went down an absolute storm, especially with older people who were really isolated. That like kind of little engagement of positivity was fabulous. It's also important to say that there are lots of organisations, both local and national, that have got great advice and support. OCVA, Community First, NCVO, all of those have got some great information if you want to kind of kickstart things or you want a bit of support when you've had a period of inactivity. The other thing to mention is that if you can meet the need and think outside the box, then do so. So Volunteer Link Up, for example, did some food deliveries for the local community fridge. That's not something we've ever done before. And we've got involved with transport for vaccinations. We got funding for both of those things from the district council and built the relationship with them. That's another thing to mention is get out there and talk to your councils. Parish councils tend to know their area really well. They're the community themselves. District and parish want to support you. They want to see you're supporting their residents. So do try and connect with them. The other thing to say is to connect with other groups. So lots of our Good Neighbour schemes got involved with community shops. They got involved with the Scouts. They got connected with the churches. And so between those groups, they could work out what residents needed. So I am speeding through this, sorry. So I thought it'd be quite a good example to show a case study of what has worked for Volunteer Link Up. So every year there's something called Volunteers Week, which this year ran from the 1st to, Martha's going to correct me now, I think it was the 6th of June or 7th of June. And what we did as Volunteer Link Up, who again, I don't know if I've made that clear, we struggled during the pandemic to meet the need. We had lots and lots of volunteers who weren't able to support our clients. And so we'd kind of slightly reduced our profile during that time. And we wanted to remind people that we were still out there. So what we did is we went out and gathered volunteer case studies. This was actually one of my first jobs. I've been with Volunteer Link Up for 6 months. And I went and sat in a coffee shop and chatted to some amazing volunteers. And then what we did is we built a relationship with the local coffee shop. So Delise, who's based in Whitney, and they offered to support us by offering a free coffee for everybody who volunteered with Volunteer Link Up for the period of time for Volunteers Week. We got in contact with our local MP and he offered to do some volunteering in the Whitney Community Hospital with a couple of volunteers that Volunteer Link Up had placed there. And we posted on Facebook and Instagram every day of Volunteers Week. And a lot of that was around using the case studies that we'd gathered earlier on and those volunteers enjoying a coffee in Delise. So we were able to match up local businesses, local residents who were volunteers, and we got some coverage in the Whitney Gazette and the Oxford Mail. And that's some of our Instagram posts that the lovely Martha, who's on this call, did. Right, is that speedy enough?
That was fantastic, Mary. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important to talk about the challenges as well as the things that worked really well, because I know that across Oxfordshire, it's been really variable what different communities have experienced. And so I think we're not gonna work out the long-term solutions without really talking about what some of the challenges are, and also how some of our traditional models of supporting people need to evolve and how we can support that evolution. I'm going to try and wrap up really quickly rather than opening it to questions. We've got some really good questions in the chat, but as I say, we'll sort of share those and the answers around the group afterwards. But for me, my brain's already whirring, going, you know, can we set up some really short, sharp sessions for people to attend on things like gaining confidence with WhatsApp, where, you know, we can tick off data worries that people have, but we can also just not make that assumption that everybody's au fait with WhatsApp and how you can use it. And just we could even just record them with a couple of people talking about them and start sharing them around that network, so that for people who you know, culturally or demographic wise just aren't confident with that sort of thing, can start to realize that these are tools that are here and useful and for everybody to use. So there's been loads of things coming out of this morning that are kind of sticking in my head and making us think we can take that forward. I am going to just check with Lisa whether there's anything else that she wanted to quickly say before we close the session a little bit early, so that we can prepare for the remembrance observation. Lisa?
Well, just thank you everyone for bearing with us. No idea what went on with Eventbrite this morning. So unfortunately, I think we lost a few people along the way, but I will pull together all the presentations, a recording of the session and some key bullet points. Do contact me if there's other things that we've not been able to cover today that you would like some support with, or questions that you've not managed to put in the chat, and I will do my best to monitor those and get responses to you or signpost you to additional support. So I hope that's been helpful, but if you have any other suggestions for what could also be useful, do let me know. And thank you all for attending, and as I said, bearing with all the technology this morning. I hope that you have a good day and it's helped a bit with your volunteer management.